My name is Robert Sumwalt, and I'm a board member with the National Transportation Safety Board. And with us today is Dr. Dan Bauer. Dan is the investigator in charge for this accident. Today has been a very important day in the investigation. We said yesterday that we had recovered the black boxes. They were being shipped to Washington, D.C. They arrived last night, and our crews in Washington immediately began working on those recorders. I am very happy to say that the recorders did their job. We have good data from both the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder. Let me tell you a little bit about the recorders and what we're finding on those recorders. To begin with, the cockpit voice recorder. As required by regulation, it is a 2-hour recorder, and it captured the entire accident flight. It is good quality audio data, which has recorded cockpit sounds and voices. I want to stress that what I'm going to tell you now is just from a preliminary audition by our cockpit voice recorder specialist in Washington. They worked for a long time last evening to open the boxes, and this morning at 8 o'clock they auditioned the cockpit voice recorder to listen to it. And here's what we know. But let me say this, that as we go on, this recorder will be subjected to a lot more scrutiny. Here's what we know. The captain was the flying pilot. The crew briefed the approach for the localizer runway 18 approach, which is the approach that they were flying at the time of the accident to that runway. 2 minutes before the end of the recording, the aircraft was cleared to land on runway 18. 16 seconds before the end of the recording was the first of 2 audible warnings, audible alerts that are generated by a computer known as a ground proximity warning system. This alert enunciated sink rate, and that's what it said. 13 seconds prior to the end of the recording, one crew member reported to the other that the runway was in sight. 9 seconds prior to the end of the recording, we have sounds that are consistent with impact. So what will happen now is this was from the first audition where they could just get us information. But what happened at noon today was the cockpit voice recorder group convened in Washington at the NTSB's laboratory to begin the painstaking process of reading out this cockpit voice recorder. They will listen to it. There'll be about 6 people on the group from various organizations, from the parties, and they will listen to it and literally type out what they're hearing, sound consistent with click. They will write down the words that they are hearing and who said them. This process, they will work all through the weekend, including into early next week. And they will create the official transcript of the cockpit voice recorder. The flight data recorder. This flight data recorder contained over 400 parameters. So our investigative staff in Washington has to go through and validate and verify those parameters to make sure that they are valid, to make sure that what they are saying is in fact what was really happening. So that process does take time. We want to make sure that the data are validated and verified. This flight data recorder captured 70 hours of data, including the entire accident flight. Air traffic control, let's talk about that. There were two controllers on duty at the time, at the time of the accident. One of the controllers was on break, which he or she is allowed to do. We interviewed the controller who was working the accident aircraft. He was a very experienced controller, had been working for a number of years. He reported that he witnessed the crash. He saw what appeared to be a bright spark flash, which he equated to what it would look like if a power line broke. He reported that he observed the landing lights of the aircraft. And then he said he no longer saw the landing lights. And that was followed by a bright orange flash, according to the controller, and then a red glow. And he immediately activated the crash phone. There was no alert of the controller's MSAW, MSAW, which stands for Minimum Safe Altitude Warning. We mentioned yesterday that today the FAA would be flight checking the localizer, the navigational aid that would guide the aircraft to the runway laterally, and that we would be flight checking the PAPI lights, the Precision Approach Path Indicator lights. Those tests were not able to be done today because of the cloud ceiling was not high enough to allow a flight check. The flight crew. The captain was hired by UPS in October of 1990. He held the required airline transport pilot certificate, and he held a first-class FAA medical certificate. He had approximately 8,600 hours total flying time, including 6,400 hours with UPS and over 3,200 hours in the Airbus A300. The first officer was hired by UPS in November of 2006. She also held an airline transport pilot certificate and a first-class medical certificate. She had approximately 6,500 hours total flying time, including 1,250 hours with UPS and about 400 hours in the Airbus A300. Both of the flight crew members were type rated in the Airbus, in the accident aircraft. They were type rated, meaning that they were rated specifically for that type of aircraft. Their duty day began, they were scheduled to depart Rockford, Illinois, Tuesday evening, the evening of the morning of the flight. They were scheduled to depart at 9:30 in the evening. They would then fly from Rockford to Peoria, and then to Louisville, and then continue on the accident flight to Birmingham. Yesterday we mentioned that we would be adding to our investigation the French equivalent of the NTSB, the BEA, and technical advisors to the BEA would be Airbus and the European Aviation Safety agency, and all three of those organizations have now been integrated in and working with our investigation. So that is the end of my prepared remarks. I'd be glad to take your questions. There's a question here, and then we'll come to you. Yes, ma'am.
Was there anything on either of the recorders that indicated the sudden drop in altitude?
Was there anything anything on either of the recorders to indicate a sudden drop in altitude? The cockpit voice recorder, the complete transcript of that will be conducted, so we'll know everything that was said in the cockpit, and we will conduct a very thorough analysis of the parameters of the flight data recorder. They record parameters sometimes in 1/16 of a second, sometimes in quarter seconds, half seconds, 1 second intervals. So we will have a lot of data to pull all of this together to help us determine the cause of this accident. Yes, sir.
You mentioned that they had said that there had been some mention of a drop in altitude on those recordings.
What I did say was that there was an audible warning enunciating sync rate, and that was 16 seconds prior to the end of the recording. Yes, sir.
Well, my question was, what does that mean? What does the sync rate warning mean? I'm not familiar with the term.
There's a ground proximity warning system installed in airliners, and there are various parameters that are programmed into that ground proximity warning system. If the aircraft, and it depends on the altitude and the closure rate, terrain closure rate, and if the descent rate, that's what's meant by sync rate, if the rate of descent gets outside of the parameters that are programmed into the computer for that altitude and that height above ground, and airspeed and flap position, and a number of things go into that determination. If it gets outside of those parameters, it will enunciate. And there's a question right here. Okay, you want to follow up?
I'm just trying to understand. It's descending by the parameters too quickly for its altitude?
That it is descending outside of the parameters that were programmed into the logic of the computer, the ground proximity warning system. Yes, there's a question here, and then we'll come over to here.
Based on all that you've told us today, it sounds like there's quite a bit of information you all have already been able to dissect, even though you mentioned this is a very long process to come. How are you all feeling about what you have been able to recover in the first 48 hours?
So how do we feel about what we've been able to recover in the first 48 hours? And I would categorize that as we feel very good. We were all relieved to know that we had good data from both of the recorders. I know that I personally breathed a huge sigh of relief once I learned we had good data. I think that as far as investigations are concerned, we are really right where we should be. Getting those black boxes and getting the data from them is very important. So it will take a while to go through all of the data and begin our factual part of it, which we're doing, and then the analysis. That takes quite a long time. Yes, sir.
Had an approximate weight of the aircraft been determined at that time when it was loaded? And I asked that because I was wondering if it's unusual that a plane of that size would be landing on a runway at that.
Have we computed calculated the weight of the aircraft? And we have those data. We have that. A weight and balance is performed before, a calculation is performed before every takeoff and landing. So we have that, and we will be carefully looking at it to compare the weight of the aircraft to the runway landing performance. So we will, that's part of the data gathering and analysis phase that we will be undergoing. So we'll go here, and then a couple of questions here, and then we'll come over to this side. Yes, sir.
Did you have any indication whether or not this flight could have landed at night on this runway before?
Do I have any information as to whether or not this flight crew had landed at this on this runway before? I do not have that, but we will try and go and determine if they did land on this runway. We will know how many times they've been into Birmingham. That's easy to find out. What's not oftentimes recorded, I was a pilot, an airline pilot for 24 years, and say that I landed at Birmingham, but I wouldn't state in my little logbook which runway I landed on. So we can find out. We're going to do our best to find out. Maybe we can interview, and we will do this. We will interview other flight crew members that have worked with this crew, and see what they can tell us also. So we'll take 2 questions here, and then we'll come over to here. So yes, sir.
Because 16 seconds was the first time you've heard any warning, is there anything you can rule out as far as the crash is concerned, as far as what wasn't the cause of the crash?
No. Can we rule anything out based on what we know at this point? And the answer is no, we're not ruling anything out. And I did say this early on, that we're really here just to put everything on the table. We're not doing any analysis while we're here. We're just in a data collection phase, and so haven't ruled anything in, haven't ruled anything out. So 1 question here, and then we're coming back over toward the center. Yes, ma'am.
I know you said you guys are going to be going over the transcripts, listening to what was said on the flight, but outside of that, what else is done? What's tomorrow's step? What comes this weekend? What's the next step?
What happens next? We will continue doing what we are doing. The wreckage diagramming is just about completed. We will be interviewing. Remember, I said there were 2 controllers on duty. We talked to the controller who worked this flight. The controller that was taking his break, he was off. He's on his scheduled days off now, so we plan to interview him this weekend. We will, again, the cockpit voice recorder group will be working through the weekend to create the transcript. Our flight data recorder group will be working through the weekend to validate and verify those data from those recorders. We are just in the very early stages of this investigation. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, but I want to emphasize that things are moving as they should. Thank you. We'll come to you and then to you. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Was there anything on that recording that you could find some sort of preliminary estimate for that sudden sink? Anything that would lead you to a problem, either in the cargo hold, a fire, anything that would lead to that sudden sinking or cause for a malfunction of instruments?
Does the sink rate enunciation lead us to believe anything in particular? And so right now we're just gathering data, and then we will start poring over all of that to try to. We'll be looking at the cockpit voice recorder. We'll be looking at the radar data, the data that we have from the air traffic control facility that records where the airplane is every 4.5 seconds. We will be looking at the flight data recorder. We're going to be combining all of this together to paint a picture of what was happening on this airplane, so that we can determine what happened and why it happened.
But was anything said in particular?
I've reported to you what the high points are of that recorder, and we will know more once that transcript is completed. Yes, ma'am.
2 points of clarification, if you will. The MSOC, there's no alert of that. Is that in to be the same as a distress call to the control tower?
So what is the MSAW, the minimum safe altitude warning system? This is a system that is programmed into radar facilities like the air traffic control facility here at Birmingham. It's software that's programmed in that if it detects that an airplane may be approaching the ground at a rate of descent that could be hazardous, these systems will enunciate. They're designed to do that. So we will be looking at that. We want to understand, we know that it did not alert. What we want to understand is, should it have alerted? And if it should have, why didn't it alert? Why did it not alert? Those are the types of things. Now that we're finding out some things, now we can start digging deeper to try and understand things. Yes, sir.
Just to clarify your timeline, as far as you were talking about seconds before the end of the recording, you said there were sounds consistent with sound of an impact 9 seconds before the end of the recording. That impact, is that believed to be impact with trees or impact with the ground?
So what was the sound consistent with impact? Was that impact with the trees? Sound consistent with impacting the ground? And what we will do is we will take the actual audio portion of this tape, of this recorder. We will then analyze it using all types of fancy electrical equipment. We'll do a spectral analysis. We should be able to understand exactly what that noise was. Was it trees? Was it ground? What was it? So that's what we'll do. So it's more to it than just listening to the voices. It's a lot of electronic, I hate to say manipulation, but that's what we do to the, we put notches and filters and all types of audio things and spectral analysis to try and identify what those sounds are.
Well, you don't know right now.
We don't know. That's analysis to say what it is. So yeah, there's a question here, and then we'll come over.
New at the wreckage site today?
Have we found anything new at the wreckage site? Things are going as expected out there. There's no surprises for what we're finding on the wreckage site. So we'll come here.
So my question is, sink rate alert, is it kind of something that is just very, very uncommon, or is it can be triggered by sensitivity like a tire pressure or something on a car?
So what would cause a sink rate a warning? It depends. There are various parameters. If you were at 10,000 feet above ground and you were descending very quickly, it would not alert. If you were very low to the ground and descending very quickly, it would alert. So there are algorithms that are programmed into the system that will alert depending on height above ground and the terrain closure. And again, it also looks at the position of the wing flaps and things like that can that it's all programmed in to look and come up with this information. Eric, I think you called last question. Is that correct? So, thank you, and stay tuned to the NTSB at our handle, Twitter handle at NTSB. We are planning to do another press briefing this time tomorrow. And as always, follow us on Twitter. Thank you very much.